Awesome. All right, I'm Paige. I'm an alcoholic, and it's just awesome to be here with you guys today. I'm so glad you could all make it. And where we're at in the book is on page 80. We're going to be picking up at the very, very bottom of page 80. And we're right in the middle of steps 8 and 9. And we're learning about how we build willingness to make amends. And we're also learning about how, structurally, we kind of go through the amends process. And so what we covered kind of last week was generally, how do we make a list? It was also, how do we build willingness? How do we make amends if we've owed money? Because most of us have owed money. It's always a reminder, if we see something in this book, how do we make an amend for this sort of thing? Most of us have done that sort of thing. It also gave us very precise directions on how we can make amends for criminal offenses, as well as how we can build willingness for criminal offenses and the amends process with that. And so where we're going to pick up is relationships. It's really the first line that we're going to read is chances are we have domestic troubles. So what do we do about, oh, hi, yeah, one sec. We are at, I'll put it in the chat. We're on page 80, very bottom paragraph. And that was something I forgot to mention. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I genuinely will answer them. And I love that sort of thing. Or if you prefer, please ask me after. And so, again, we're at the very, very bottom of page 80. And what we're talking about is how can we make amends to those that we're closest to? How can we make amends to those that we're in intimate relationship with? And it's going to give us wonderful ideas on how we make the approach and wonderful suggestions about how we build the willingness. So very bottom of page 80. The chances are that we have domestic troubles. Perhaps we are mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We probably don't want to put our old sex conduct list out there to the world, is kind of what it said. We might want to keep that between us and God and our sponsor, right? It says, we doubt if, in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. So what we're talking about is these human problems. And again, if you remember when we were on page 69, talking about sex and romantic relationships, what we were saying is that we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. Now, we'd hardly be alcoholic or addict or whatever brings us to the study here today, but we'd hardly be human if we didn't. So it says, we doubt if in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people, but drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years with an alcoholic, a wife, a partner, a spouse, anyone who is close to me gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. That means they put up their walls. They put up that, man, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to let you in because you've hurt me so many times. How could she be anything else? The husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself. So I, as the alcoholic, fall into self and self-pity. He commences to look around in the nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor. Perhaps he's having a secret and exciting affair with the girl who understands. In fairness, we must say that she may understand, but what are we going to do about a thing like that? What I want to point out is this book was written to go out into the world. And I might be alone in Calgary, Alberta, and only have a copy of this book and doing my best to follow its directions. So when it says, okay, she might understand, but what are we going to do about that? That for me is another example of this book meeting me where I'm at and taking me where I need to go. Because when I'm doing things I ought not be doing, how often do I get really defensive about them? Especially when somebody is like, hey, that's not okay behavior. And I'm like, hey, you don't understand me. You don't know what about me and my stuff, right? I get defensive. So I think that's the book's way of bridging that gap and bridging that defensiveness. So in fairness, we must say she may understand, but what are we going to do about a thing like that? A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he's married to a loyal and courageous girl who has literally gone through hell for him. And that is my experience. Just that idea that the people who were closest to me in my life, the people who loved me the most, were the people who suffered the most as the result of my alcoholism. You know, whether there was infidelity in my relationships or not, I caused them pain and I caused them harm. And so right now it is going to give us very specific directions on how we handle infidelity. But then it's going to open up and give us very specific directions on how we make amends to those that were closest to us, even if there has not been infidelity. So, and welcome to those who just joined us. We're here on page 81. And we're at the first full paragraph, about halfway down the page. So it says, whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. And this is one of those things, up until this point in the book, it's like willing to any lengths, willing to any lengths, willing to any lengths, right? That's what the 8th step is all about. And we come here and it's like, wait, not always? And it might be like, hey, why are we getting all soft about this whole infidelity thing? Why aren't we going to any lengths? And what we're going to see is that same thing that we saw when it came to criminal offenses. I really believe we still need to be willing, but we also want to use discernment. And that's that judgment without judging, right? So it says, if she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She will want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. And there's that line in that 5th step where it talks about how, where we really do need to be, the rule is we must be hard on ourselves, but always considerate of others. So even when we were talking about criminal offenses, what we were trying to do is set right the wrong without throwing anyone else under the bus. And we see that same principle here, that I am to own up to what I have done, but it's probably not the best thing to do to throw somebody else under the bus. And again, it says, we are sorry for what we have done, and God willing, it shall not be repeated. More than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we have often found this the best course to take. And so just a review of how we, the process through which we make amends. I'm just going to kind of share it on the screen so that we have that context. And so it says, it's first when we sit down with people and we make that amends, what we're talking about is explaining why we're there, what we're doing, what an amends is. And again, it can look something like I'm a member of a 12-step fellowship, and part of me staying well requires that I have a look at my life and I set right the wrongs that I've made. And I can see that I have caused you harm. And I would like the opportunity, if you would allow me, to make it right. And then what we do is we get into our defects of character, into our harms, being specific when it will not cause harm to others, and focusing on my defects of character. And so that is where it talks about, undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. I have not been the partner that you needed me to be. I have been, and it says we've been wild. I don't know if I would necessarily amend it by saying I have been wild, but in so doing, I was selfish and I was dishonest and I was inconsiderate of you. And I didn't live up to the agreement that we made when we entered into a relationship together. And that was wrong of me. And it goes on to say that we are sorry for what we have done. Now, keep in mind, an amend is not a sorry, but there are times where it is important that we show contrition. See, a lot of times I come to the amends process, especially when I'm new, and I think, I can't make amends. I said sorry 100 times. They don't want to hear sorry anymore. And amends is far deeper and far more than a sorry. But there are those times where people do need to hear that contrition. And often I find generally in amends, it can be more powerful to say, and I was wrong. That was wrong of me, rather than sorry. But again, sometimes we need that. It can then be important to go on and ask, it was not my intention to leave anything out. But I do want to make sure I give you the opportunity to share with me any other ways in which I caused you harm, or anything else you need to share with me. And then I found it important to ask, is there anything I can do to make this right? And again, keeping in mind in this instance, it's probably not the best to throw anyone else under the bus. All right. And so going back to, all right, so very bottom of page 81. It says, our design for living is not a one-way street. And this might seem interesting, but for me, this is an important line. And this is a theme that we're going to start to pick up here into action. And this is a theme that is going to continue on into working with others, into two wives, into family afterward, into vision for you. This theme, our design for living. And whenever we see a design for living, what that means is a way of life. So this way of life is not a one-way street. And what we're talking about there, hi buddy, this is absolutely the best time for a cuddle. I cannot think of any better time. Love you. Mwah. So my attention sometimes just goes. I don't know how it happens. By the way, I like all day I've wanted his attention. You know, I just wanted him to come and it's right now. He's like, oh, what's going on? But when it talks about our design for living is not a one-way street, what we're talking about there is, if there is anyone in my life that I want to help, if there is anyone in my life that I'm worried about, maybe their alcoholism, maybe their addiction, maybe it's a behavior that I don't relate to, if there's anyone in my life that I want to help, the best thing that I can do is work this program like my life depends on it. The best thing I can do is dive into this way of life. The best thing that I can do, and I tell this to my sponsees, is have a kick butt program. Although I don't say butt, I say the other word. Have a kick butt program and shine that light of God so bright that we can't deny, that other people cannot deny that the miracle has happened for them. And so when it says, it is as good for the wife as for the husband, what we're talking about there is this way of life. Of course, it's for those of us who have alcoholism, or we're coming to the study, we have addiction. You know, of course, it's for us, but this is a way of life that answers all our problems. This is a way of life that is of use to anyone. And we see that this way of life is offered to codependents. This way of life is offered to Al-Anons. This way of life works in so many instances. Now it goes on, and this is a tough line. It says, if we can forget, so can she. And rather than skirting around that sentence, which is like, whoa, that's a little rough, I want to address it head on, right? It's a little harsh to be like, hey, if I can forget I cheated, you can forget I cheated on you, right? It's like, whoa. But one of the things I know is I've worked with a lot of human beings, and infidelity is quite common, and it's such a part of so many of our stories. And what comes with it is a level of guilt and a level of shame and a level of self-hatred that is corrosive and eroding. And I believe what it's talking about is, if I can work through that and get freedom from those difficult, awful emotions, that freedom is also available to those of us who have been cheated on. And so that I just want to address that head on. All right. It is better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. Again, reminding us not to throw other people under the bus. And keep in mind, it says, so what we're going to be reading is that we're talking about jealousy. And we're going to read that, like, keep it always in sight that we're dealing with that most terrible human emotion, jealousy. And I'm skipping ahead, but I just kind of feel like talking about it now. There are things, and I won't say you guys, but there are things that I have done in relation to jealousy in and around intimate relationships that, of course, I'm like, I would never do around anything else. That jealousy and that insecurity breeds this behavior. What I'm talking about is, you know, a country song, that country music where it's like, he cheated on me and I'm gonna break his car with a baseball bat. That behavior. You know, that he didn't text me, or she didn't text me, or they didn't text me, and I'm driving by their house, that sort of behavior. You know, that behavior where we're spamming their phone, that behavior. And that, not cool if I'm doing it, but that behavior is coming from pain, and that behavior is coming from hurt. And sometimes that betrayal of trust causes more harm than anything else. So what we're going to really get into is the idea that this is an area where we want to handle it with discernment and tact, and we want to bring a lot of God into this process. So it says, perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. What that means is, hey, there are cases where we just need to lay it all to bear, let it all out, and be absolutely honest. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. And this is a direction. Each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. And that, man, that's the type of prayer we're talking about when we're talking about how we're not praying for our own selfish ends. It's in many ways like this revolutionary prayer. For somebody like me, I'm not necessarily you guys. Maybe you guys came here a lot more spiritual than I did. But for somebody like me, this is a revolutionary prayer. I'm not asking God, show me what I need so I can get what I want. I'm asking God, show me what I can do for what is best for the other person. Show me what is best for them, their happiness, their serenity, their peace of mind. What would be best for them? And that's another one of those step 8 or step 9 or whatever you want to call it, prayers. And see, there's a lot of prayers here in this part of the book. And it says, keep it always in sight that we're dealing with that most terrible human emotion, jealousy. The one that the country songs are all about, right? And it says, good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk a face-to-face combat. And what that direction is talking about is to be a general in an army. Like, to explain the metaphor, to be in a general in the army, I might send out the troops face to face, and that would be like face the problem head on. But when it talks about going around the flank, that's going around to the side. And that maybe there are times where addressing it a little more indirectly might be best. And so those are the directions that are given for how we address and amend infidelity. Now, keep in mind, I have caused harm if there has been no infidelity, and I've caused harm to those closest to me, especially my family members. So it says, if we have no such complication, there is plenty we should do at home. Oh man, I was hoping if I didn't cheat, I wouldn't have to do a whole lot of work. Darn it. Looks like there's more work. Looks like this chapter is into action. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Certainly, he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents whom for years he's so shockingly treated. So sometimes in the rooms we'll hear that the only amends I need to make is staying sober. And right there it's telling me, no, that's not our experience. Our experience is I do need to stay sober, otherwise I'm continuing to cause harm. But it's also a twofold thing. Heck, if I have this deal, like if I have this illness as it's laid out in this book, I'm not going to be able to stay sober if I don't make those amends. But also when we spoke earlier By earlier, I mean last week. When we spoke last week about what an amend is. An amend is to repair and to restore. And we can look at it as to make good, to make right, to set right the wrong. Me being sober is a start, but mere abstinence does not set right the wrong. For example, let's say I was stealing from one of you, like, and I was like, okay, I have stopped stealing. That does not give you your money back. That's just stops the waste, right? Stops the theft. And keep in mind, an alcoholic of my type, I stole from those who were closest to me. And I'm not talking about money. I stole from them peace of mind. I stole from them nights of sleep. I stole from them, that I took from them that peace and that serenity and that not having to worry about somebody like me. That's what I stole from them. And so sobriety just stops me from stealing. It doesn't make it right. So passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Passing all understanding is our non-alcoholic loved ones who have gone through this illness with us. And it says, had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, would perhaps be dead. It goes on to say, the alcoholic is like a tornado, roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken. Sweet relationships are dead. Affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. Keep in mind, I am the tornado. So I have roared my way through the lives of others. I have broken hearts. I have killed sweet relationships. I have uprooted affections. It has been my selfish and my inconsiderate habits that have caused turmoil in the lives of others. Drunk or sober. Drunk or sober. I've committed harm. I've committed harm like that sober. I have. And so there's this, kind of bringing it back to the 8-step list, because for those who've been coming around, I talk about how this isn't 8 and then 9, it's 8 and 9. There is a method of cultivating our 8-step list. Now, keep in mind, much of our 8-step list will come from our 4th step. And a lot of that heavy lifting is done for us. And if I've been searching and fearless and thorough, especially in the exact nature of my wrongs and that part of the inventory process, man, I don't have to do too much extra writing in the prep work for my amends. I can see it, That being said, if I'm not sure who I owe an amends to, there is a method of figuring out who I owe amends to called the tornado method, which is quite apt. And I am the tornado. And keep in mind, I am the eye of the storm, right? And that tornado, or even that hurricane, for those who are living in places where hurricanes happen and not tornadoes, I don't know. But I am the just weather phenomenon. I don't know. But I am the eye of that storm. And so who has experienced the strongest winds? Who has experienced the greatest amount of pain and damage? Those closest to me. So those are who I put on that list. And then I go out. Who's a little on the outside? Maybe not my immediate family, but who then? Maybe it's my friends. Maybe it's my colleagues. Maybe it's the people that I worked with. Right. And then I go out and then I look at, just my acquaintances, and maybe I'm even looking at society. I'm looking at those relationships going outward. And that's how I can kind of get a gauge of who I owe an amends to. And this line, it says, and for those that just joined us, I'm so glad you're here. We're on the bottom of page 82, very bottom paragraph, and very middle of the bottom paragraph. It says, we feel a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough. So I want you to know, I would love it. Genuinely, I would love it if I didn't have to make amends. I would love it if sobriety would be enough. Like, that's what I would like. Like, I'm not over here all pious and like, oh, make your amends, oh, because I say so. You know, I live my life with the ninth step in mind. You know what I mean? That ninth step has kept me from a lot of behavior, right? I didn't want to make amends. But a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough. So again, sobriety, mere abstinence is a starting place, but it's not enough to really restore and repair and set right the wrong. And this is, now keep in mind, whenever there's a metaphor in this book, I'm like, this is one of my favorite metaphors. So this is one of my favorite metaphors. It says, he is like the farmer who comes up out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife, he remarked, don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing? And what I want to point out, right, is that I was the wind. See, I was the tornado. I tore down the barn. I turned around the root cellar. There's a poor cow in the tree. Don't worry, he'll get down safe. You know what I mean? And I was the one that did it. I have leveled the farm to the ground. But all I've done at this point, up until this point, is I've stopped blowing. And it goes on to say at the top of page 83, yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. So what I need to do is repair. I need to flip over the grain cellar and put the grain back in it. I don't, if there's farmers, maybe you're not supposed to do that. Maybe it's tipped over. You're not, I don't know. I don't know farming. We got to take the cow safely and lovingly out of the tree. I've got to raise that barn. I got to repair that barn. I got to put the shingles back on, right? I've got to take the lead. I've got to repair the damage done. You know, and I had the privilege of traveling to. I was talking about this before the meeting. I had the privilege of going out to South Dakota and speaking out there, and it was this most incredible, amazing trip. And in South Dakota, the bison is the buffalo bison. It's this animal that carries such great significance to the people there. You know, the first people there, and even those who move there and who live there. And whenever I come to amends, I'm sort of reminded of the story of the buffalo. And see, what happens with the buffalo is whenever there's a storm that comes in, other animals like deers and me, there's a storm coming in, I'm out the other way. I want nothing to do with it. I'm hightailing my butt out of there, right? I want nothing to do with it. But the buffalo, and if you've seen a buffalo, they have all that fur and that hair that's on their front. And the reason is because what they do is they face the storm and they march into it. And in marching into the storm, they cut the storm in half. And so what's different about me and the buffalo, two things. One, I don't want a buffalo. I want to rabbit my way out of there. You know what I mean? I don't want to do it. Two, I created the storm. It is my storm. But we're going to get to the step 9 promises. And as we get into those promises, we're going to see that they happen about halfway through our amends. So about halfway through the process of setting right these wrongs, about the process of halfway through into the storm dissipates. And there's the sunshine that comes. And again, those who know me know I love my metaphors. One of my favorite, right? See, anytime there's a metaphor, I'm like, I love it. It's my favorite. Is God is light, right? That sunlight of the Spirit. So I clean up these wrongs and that light comes and that storm goes. But again, back top of page 83, we're going to be given very specific directions. It's good to know I'm not the only one who has a dog that wanted a cuddle. But we're going to be given very specific directions on how he heard me, on very specific directions on how we set things right with our family, how we make amends to those closest to us. So it says, yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. Again, it's It's not going to happen overnight. I do want to make my amends. I don't want to sit on the amends process, but with those closest to me, it's going to take a while to really restore that damage. We must take the lead. See, my life is the one that depends upon having a spiritual experience. It doesn't matter the wrongs they did. I must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fit the bill at all. Again, an amends is not a sorry. A sorry might happen in the amends process, but amends is deeper than that. It is a restoration and a repairing. So it says we ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Again, that follows that same format of explaining what I did, being very specifically focusing on my defects of character. So I do want to make that direct amends to my family. But what we're going to see is that I'm also going to have to follow that amends up with continued action. Man, this chapter into action is really heavy on that whole like action part. Like it's got a whole lot of do, you know. I was hoping it would have a whole lot of not having to do, whole lot of laurels to rest on, you know, hoping to rest on those. Nope, I got to do. And again, I love this because this is the book meeting us where we're at and taking us where we need to go. It says their defects may be glaring, right? Because you can just imagine somebody like me reading this, even with my sponsor, and being like, but hey, my family, their defects are glaring. Yes, their defects may be glaring, but chances are that your own actions are partially responsible. Darn it. Darn it, back to me, back to my behavior again. So it says, so we clean house with the family. So that is how we make amends, directly. And it says, asking. And whenever in this book we see ask or we ask, that's a prayer. So asking each morning in meditation, oh man, that heavily implies that I have a morning meditation practice. Darn it. That heavily implies there's more action to do. So not just prayer and meditation. Darn it. So asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. You know, and that theme of patience, tolerance, kindliness, love, we're going to see that again and again and again. And just like the importance that I need to demonstrate this way of life, we're going to see that I need to channel that patience, that tolerance, that kindliness, and that love. And when I do that, it's going to be mirrored and it's going to be reflected back to me. When I do that, the people around me are going to change. Here's the kicker. They might not even change, but I promise you they will change. How I see them will change. How I show up to them will change. But I don't know about you. I'm sure you guys are way more spiritual than I am. But I can't show anyone an unlimited level of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. I don't know about you, but my patience comes with a limit. My tolerance isn't always that tolerant, and it's kind of mood dependent. If it's before noon, it's very limited. Kindliness and love, I don't know about you, but for me, those often come with strings. I got strings attached to my kindness. I got conditions with my love, right? And I love that it's our Creator show us the way. See, one of the things that and I think I spoke about this last week, whenever there's an action that I'm scared to take, or whenever there's an action that seems impossible, you want me to be nice, even to that guy? Do you know what he did, right? An action that seems impossible. What I am reminded is that I am not the one doing it. My job is to get enough of me out of the way so that God can flow through me. That's what I'm here to do. Get Paige out of the way and channel God's patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And I promise that God has a deeper reservoir of tolerance. God has patience, even in the morning. And God has kindliness and love that is absolutely unconditional, that does not come with strings. And man, when I seek that and I seek to do that, it is incredible. I become somebody that I am absolutely not 100%, especially in the mornings. If all you take from this study today is Paige is not a morning person. But I mean, if you want me to do service, I will do service in the mornings. I'll throw that out there too. Because you know why? Because God will work through me. I just gotta get my butt out of bed and do my morning routine and let God work through me. All right. And so going back to page 83, it says the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. I got confirmation about the mornings. It's always good to know I'm not alone. So it says the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. And that is something that I've just been seeing so loudly and so clearly in the book lately. You know how the big book fairies or the big book elves will sprinkle new things in the longer you're doing this? This is one. How much this program is not about what I know. How much this program is about the actions that I take to experience the God of my understanding. See, it does no good if I show up here miserable and cranky and resentful and irritable and full of self, and I tell you to work the steps. You're going to be like, why? I do not want what you have, right? It does no good if I show up to my family and I'm sober and I'm miserable and irritable and snapping at them, and I'm not present for them, and I'm in myself, and I'm manipulative and controlling with them. That does no good. They're not going to see the change, right? What I need to do is demonstrate the change. That is what I am called to do. The spiritual life is not a theory. I need to live it. I need to demonstrate it. And I'm going to share kind of my experience. And it's not something that I speak about that much anymore, it's interesting. I'm just reflecting on it as I'm talking. Focus. But when I first got sober and into recovery, my brother, he got married in my first year of sobriety. And they had the birth of their first child, my nephew. And I was absolutely not invited for either of those things. I was not wanted. I was not welcome. I was not allowed to know what quadrant of this, for those that Calgary, it's a quadrant city, like southwest, northwest, southeast, southwest. I wasn't even supposed to know what quadrant of the city they lived in because of the harm, not because that they're bad people, but because of the depth of harm that I caused to them. I met my nephew for the first time on his 1-year birthday party. And see, now, and that was I love those. I have a niece and a nephew, and they're like my favorite people. I love them the most. And it's such a gift of sobriety. But I needed to demonstrate that change. They needed to be able to see. And it was after I was started to be allowed into that family and into that relationship that I was able to make that demonstration. Right. And of course, I have to make a face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball direct amends. But I also need, in conjunction with that demonstration of change. And yeah, this was like years ago. I was maybe 3 years sober. Oh my gosh. So this was maybe like sorry, I'm having a mild existential crisis. I'm like, this was a decade ago. Ooh, like maybe 9 years, maybe not a decade. Oh, so I was sober maybe about 3 or 4 years. And my brother at the time, he had a cancer scare and he was in a lot of pain and he had to go to the hospital. And the day he had to go to the hospital was also the same day that my nephew came out of surgery. My nephew, you wouldn't know it to look at him, but he has a lot of physical stuff. He has a blood platelet disorder. And so for him, surgery is incredibly, incredibly dangerous and incredibly risky. And on the same day that he got out of surgery was the same day that my brother had to go into the hospital. and my brother's wife at the time. She could have asked anyone on earth to come and watch those kids. But she asked me. And I got to show up for those kids. And I got to give those kids, well, I got to give just that love, that unconditional love. Got to give my nephew that medication every couple hours. I got to be that person. And when we talk about the demonstration, not for a moment were they worried that their children would not be in good hands. Not for a moment were they worried that I would not be there to care for them. Not for a moment would they be worried that my brother had some painkillers. Not for a moment were they worried that I was going to get into those or the booze. Not for a moment were they worried. And that is how I set right that wrong. Being and demonstrating and doing. And so, yeah, that's that example of, I can't just show up and be, I'm sober, why haven't you forgiven me? I need to demonstrate that change. And I'm the one that caused that harm. I'm the one that caused that pain. And I this is a weird thing to say. I am grateful it took so long. I am grateful that they didn't want me around, because I have that experience to share with others. And when I have to really repair that damage, I see the power of God, and I see just how important those relationships really are. And so it says, so we have to live it. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not urge them. I should not nag. That is going to be a thing that we're going to see in those later chapters. Nagging doesn't get me anywhere. It says we should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will. This is a sneaky little promise. They will change in time. Sneaky little promise. They will. And here's how they will. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. Again, I need to demonstrate that change. And again, for me, because I'm so grateful I have that experience, we must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. And I get to demonstrate that. And just like I couldn't make them or force people to forgive me or force them to have a relationship with me, just like any other amends, the results are not in my hands. Where I leave the results are in God's hands. I am in the showing up and doing my best business. I'm no longer in the results business. And now what we're talking about is, what about amends where the person cannot be seen? What about those amends where I can't ever make it right? What about those amends where somebody is passed on, right? Those types of amends. It says there may be some wrongs we can never fully right. It says we don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. Now, keep in mind, there's some context. In the 1930s, when this book went out, not everyone had their own phone, but like a lot of people are way more accessible. So maybe I know I need to make that amends. And they live on the other side of the world. Well, we've got some people from all over on this Zoom call, right? Face to face, eyeball to eyeball, always best. A video call, better than nothing. A phone call, better than nothing, And then I have had where it's like I've worked with sponsees and all they had was an address. And we looked, that was all that we could find. And so we sent a letter and with contact information. And it's incredible how God shows up in that. But another thing is, if I owe amends, and I have owed amends to people who have passed on, how can I set right that wrong? A common way is to write that amends letter to them, to do something like a gravesite amends, to sit, by their grave if they have one, or to sit in somewhere, for me, sometimes it can be really helpful to sit out in nature, to sit in somewhere that reminds me of them, and to read that amends to them. That's one way to make those amends. Another is to, like, if it's still on my heart, sometimes I can take an action proportional to the harm. Like, for example, we're kind of talking about dogs and how they want our attention. Or we're trying not to talk about dogs and how they wanted our attention, but one of us struggles with focus. It's me. And so let's say I amends to somebody who's passed on who loved animals. And I felt like I wasn't there for them and I wasn't present for them. Maybe one of the ways in which I could make those amends is showing up to something like my local SPCA and volunteering my time. Could that be? And it's just, and I really focus on if it's still on my heart, I still got to clean it up, you know. Another form of amends when somebody is passed on, I just want to share my experience, is what's called a surrogate amends. You know, if we've lost a loved one that we owe an amends to, sometimes we can find somebody who's alive. It's always good to find somebody who's in 12-step because they kind of know the amends process, who kind of resembles them or has some of their characteristics. And we can ask if they know what a surrogate amends is, and ask if they're willing to just be a physical representation of that person to just, you know, hear that process. And just, I share that because sometimes those amends where people have been passed on, we sometimes worry about it. And if it's still on my heart, these are different ways that we can use, and I've found to use to help clean it up. And now what we get into are the step 9 promises. I want to point out, sometimes we'll go to meetings and we'll hear the promises. No. We just saw another little sneaky promise. These are these step 9 promises. There are promises all over the book and all over these steps, but these are the step 9 ones. And it says, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, what is this phase of our development? Amends. If I am painstaking about actively going out and making my amends, setting right my wrongs, heck yeah. 250. I have not counted, but I'll believe you. Yeah. Especially if you take them sentence by sentence, I believe you. Yeah. So if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, actively going out, making amends, setting right our wrongs, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. And see, that's why I always want to emphasize step 9 promises. These do not come true when I've done halfway through like a 90 meetings in 90 days, or even halfway through at my 6th step. These come halfway through, actively clearing up the wreckage of my past. Also, just like earlier in the directions on step 9, where it said in 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. It's unexpected that it goes well. Similarly, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. My experience coming up to the process of amends is I always think, I'm a little negative Nelly. I always think it's going to go bad. I always going to think it's awful. But if when I do it, I experience, it's amazing. It's amazing, right? It says we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. New freedom, new happiness, one that I have not experienced before, something new. It says we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And here's why, because I've cleaned it up. I've made my best attempt to repair the damage done. That's why I don't need to shut the door on it. That's why I don't need to keep the skeletons in the dark. That is why, because I've done my best to clean it up. It says we will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. Now it's not like, hey, I'm gonna comprehend. I'm gonna deeply understand that word serenity, not just know what it means in the dictionary. Going to experience serenity, and that again, you know, when we talk about agnostic knowing and conscious knowing, it's that same knowing of peace. I'm gonna know peace on an experiential level. It says, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. Man, so often a 9th step will turn into a 12-step call in ways we could not even imagine. I always want to get myself out of God's way, right? And even if it's an indirect way, the more experience I have with amends, the more experience I have to show you with amends. right? The more things I have amended in my life, the more I'm better able to help you through that process. And my life depends on helping you. It says that feeling of uselessness and self-pity, which is what I was consumed by when I got here, it will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. You remember how we talked about how I'm not a people pleaser. I'm a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind. That codependent, I need you to like me to be okay, that starts to fall away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. And that's what I needed, a new outlook, a new attitude. It says fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. I will point out it's fear of, not people and economic insecurity will leave us. I want to be alone and wealthy. Nope, that's not what's promised. But the fear of, right? The fear of will leave us. And it makes sense that if I'm actively going out and making my financial amends, I can really see that it's not my money. I can really see that it's God's money. And as I go out and make my amends, I lose that codependent. I need you to like me to be okay. And I will say, for somebody like me, it does grow back. I'm just if you have that experience too, just me, bye. Anywho. And it says we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Dealing with an amends right away, dealing with, anything right away, baffling, and then it's because we have practiced. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And it says, are these extravagant promises? And in the rooms, quite often we chant, we think not. But man, when I'm new, and I haven't done this work, I'm like, girl, they might be. They seem a little extravagant, so extravagant. We like to read them all the time, And so we chant, we think not. And it says they are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And this is maybe something a little more now I'm not saying worthwhile, but this is something to chant. They will always materialize if we work for them. I need to take the action on amends to experience them. And just what I'll end with is on page 52, we have something called the bedevilments. And the step 9 promises and the bedevilments, they kind of, now this isn't mine, but I got some people who are real fans of the bedevilments. I mean, not in their own life, but they just really resonated. And so if the pain that I experienced on page 52, if I want freedom from it, I need to take the actions of 4 through 9. So on page 52, when we're talking about, like really in step 2, before I've taken any actions, we're having trouble with personal relationships. But if I take this work, I take these actions, I will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in my fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. On page 52, I can't control my emotional nature. My feelings and emotions are guiding me and they're all over the place. Now on page 84, I will comprehend the word serenity and I will know peace. On page 52, I am a prey to misery and depression. I fall into misery and depression. Now on page 84, my whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. On page 52, I couldn't make a living. And that doesn't necessarily mean we get our money back, but fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. Step 9 promises. 52, we had a feeling of uselessness. 84, that feeling of uselessness, and self-pity will disappear. We were full of fear on page 52. Page 84, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And it goes on to say we were unhappy. And now we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We couldn't seem to be of real use to other people. It goes on to say no matter how far down the scale we've gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. We will not wish to, my head is blocking it. There we go. I moved me. We will see how our experience can benefit others. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. And most of all, we'll suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And so if I want to go from that hopelessness on page 52 to the hope that's on offer on page 84, unfortunately, I'm going to have to take some action. And next week, we'll get into even more action. So thank you. Thank you for being here with me. All right. And I will stop the recording.